Good evening, and welcome back to the Weird and the Wonderful with Strange Bones. That's me. And tonight we are carrying on with our trail of witches in the Gothonic world. And we began, as you might remember, in England. And of course, the reason that we began there is because several of the roots of witchcraft date back to the Anglo-Saxons, which of course came over from the Gothonic world. And in turn, this led us across to the Germanic tribes, which perhaps is the origin of this particular style of witchcraft. But of course, it leads us further on to the north, to the Vikings. And there we find a number of very interesting things. So let's have a look. Now, by and large, there was more than one variety. And it was usable by varying varieties, shall we say, of magic users. So there were different groups, different types. Hey there, Agnes. But they all were related to the two primary forms, if you will, of magic in the Gothonic realms, that of Seidr and of Galdr. Seidr is the style that was mostly female, but not entirely, which was a kind of magic that included divination, cursing, shamanic journeying. And if you're a South African, you might very much consider these to be, in some ways, somewhat similar to the Isangoma. Now, the Galdr was the spoken magic, which was again quite different. And this was songs, poetry, and speaking that was used to achieve quite a variation in magical effects, such as controlling the weather, damaging weaponry, and even raising the dead, such as the famous Draugr. And if you're a fan of the Skyrim games, you know all about the Draugr. So they're actually very well depicted in a great many ways, almost true to form. Now, they did a number of their things via the runic alphabet. And of course, this allowed enchantments, amongst other things as well. So you had varying varieties of possibilities. And the rune magic, of course, was particularly linked to Odin. So divination, where runes could be carved into sticks or stones and tossed to form patterns. It could also, however, be used for enchantments carved into wood or stone or onto famous swords, of course. Adam, welcome back, sir. Good to have you back again, and much thanks for the likes. And of course, many of the great famous Viking weapons were indeed rune carved. So, with this as our topic for tonight, I'm going to remind you all that we have only one rule on the channel. We demand that you are polite. You can agree, you can disagree, you can have your own opinions and be welcome. And of course, we welcome for you to comment and share the very same. If you wish to, we always enjoy comments. But if you are rude, you will get the immortal boot. We have quite a lot of different people from different cultural backgrounds and different faiths that follow us, and we do demand a certain amount of respect. That said, a small disclaimer as well, because of course this has proved over the few lives to be quite a touchy topic for some. There are two views that matter when dealing with witchcraft. The first is the view of the practitioners, and the second is the view of the general public, especially the ruling part of the general public. And very often these views might be strongly in conflict, and of course this is precisely where the great witch trials and the demonizing of witches came about, because a great many of what we call witches were simply the priests and priestesses of an older pre-existing religion that when Christianity moved in, they deemed it was bad. So we are not promoting and we are not deriding either side of the argument. We are merely looking at what made things happen for our own interest and elucidation. That said, of course, comment greatly, like muchly, share, subscribe, and do all the good things that keep the channel going, because that is very important for us. And with that, let's get stuck in. So, how was magic practiced in the Nordic regions? We know that there was chanting and there was rituals, and usually when you have full-on chants, you have some kind of ritual around with it that were ways to draw in and channel magical energy. There were also shorter versions, which I suppose we would refer to as a spell, spoken words and things. And of course, out of that, we get our concept of spelling. So it seems that we've all learned a little magic. We know, of course, that we had the runic alphabets known as Futhorc, and they are called Futhorc because unlike the alphabet that starts A, B, alpha, beta, the Futhorc go in sets which go Theo, Thorn, As, Rad, Ken, Gifu, Win. And out of that, we get Futhorc. Hello, Bumblebee. Hello, Bantham. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, alongside the runic and the chanting and such, we also had a number of shamanic practices which are attested to in archaeology, where even certain drugs were used in order to facilitate the shamanic journeys, which involve certain forms of meditation where the soul is seen to separate from the body and go into the other worlds, of which, as we know, there are 9. There are the 9 realms. So this is part of Seder, just as the chanting is part of Galder. We also know that objects and amulets were used. The volvers were staff holders, and that was not only a symbol of authority, but also used for their shamanic journeys and more. We also know that these things, as I've said, were carved uh, into weapons, shields, helms. Very often there were specific bind runes. A bind rune is made by writing the runes in a connected manner in different ways to create the great famous bind runes, such as the famous Helm of Ore, which was used on the helmets uh, and offered a great deal of protection, apparently. We know that the purpose of the magic was for beneficial uses such as healing, protection, to bring good fortune, to ward off damage to homes and such, and to ensure victory in battle. But of course, it was also used for destructive reasons such as curses, bewitchings, and harm. So there was quite a whole lot that could and were used in this regard. We know that the Viking belief was held that the runes could be used to work magic. Tacitus, the Roman writer, observed that rune divination among the Germanic people was often done describing runic symbols carved onto sticks and thrown to the ground to form patterns that could be read. We know in Scandinavia a Viking poem has spoken of a similar pattern that could be done, describing wood chips carved with runes and tossed into blood for divination purposes. We do know as well that blood was quite important to the Vikings. Good evening to you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Awesome to see you back. And yes, as promised, we are going on with the Viking rituals in Scandinavia, which I think is going to be a good one. So we're just running through some of the observations on what magic was and how it worked. A curious fact, which may or may not be of interest to you, is in the proper runic symbols, in the older ones at any rate, there is almost no lateral or longitudinal carved lines at all. And the simple reason for this is that cutting a lateral line across the grain of wood is difficult and generally doesn't come out quite so neat. Whereas to go with the grain or at an angle to the grain, it's far easier, and that's why the runes have the shapes that they do. So you find that there are certain changes to the way the runes appear further along when they started being written on paper rather than carved into wood. Now we find a number of stories, such as the Saga of Egil, where Egil meets a farmer whose daughter is very sick, and he finds a whalebone crudely carved with runic symbols hidden in her bed. And it turns out a local boy had placed it there to try and help her. But because the runes were not drawn right, it was making her worse. As a rune master, of course, Egil was able to destroy the rune and replace it with a proper rune to facilitate healing. And this emphasizes not only the power that rune masters were thought to have, but also the danger of the runes if you didn't know what you were doing. So, a small warning perhaps for improper runic use. Now, of course, we know that through Norway, Sweden, Greenland, and Iceland, the runes were all used and were considered to be very important. We know that things such as the Icelandic grimoires do speak of it, and there were several magical rune staves, such as the Galdrastafr, which was a stack of various runes together creating magical symbols. The manuscripts record the purpose of these symbols, such as killing an enemy's cattle or guidance through bad weather, and instructions on how to use them. Now, the Galdrastafr are often referred to as Viking symbols, but it's important to know that when exactly they happened might not have been at a time when the actual Vikings lived. The Vikings were not a people. A Viking was what you did. You went Viking. So the people of the areas stopped going Viking after a certain time and therefore can't be considered to be part of the Viking Age per se. Viking was an action, not a people. So you could be from Greenland, Iceland, Sweden, Norway, or anywhere in the Scandinavian regions and still be a Viking if it was done. Now, we do know that these old writings dealt with the Nordic gods, but also because of when some of them were written, they got mixed up with Christian occult texts, and Christian saints are even mentioned therein. Now, the making of a Galdrastafr is very likely something that was done during the Viking time. And from the times of the Scandinavian migration period, they found example of rune stacking and evidence of runes connected specifically and used in varying spell forms. So not just bind runes, but also runic writing, where it was actually writing to say something, but also lines, a rig as they were called, that was designed to bind together certain powers to create a spell, and certainly would be parts, if that can be said, of the way magic worked. They also, of course, related to a very specific form of magic by and large, we only know a small amount about for the most part, which was the magic of the warriors, the berserker. And what was a berserker? Well, it's actually again, not a group or a people or a type. It's a thing you did. Berserkers were warriors, Nordic warriors, who fought in a trance-like fury. They went into this trance. So they went berserker. They were within the grip of the berserker gang, and they are known in this state for immense strength, courage, and ruthlessness. And they came in different types, which makes it even more interesting. They were used as shock troops, of course, and they had very animalistic behavior, biting their shields, fighting without armors. But you got different types. So the strict berserker was only one type of this kind of shamanic magic, and it refers to the bear shirt, referring to the animal skins that were sometimes worn. But there were different other varieties within their groups. They used ritualistic practice, fasting, hyperventilation, and such to self-induce a trance. At times, it was possible that they even used certain drugs, hallucinogenic plants and the likes, to create their their state, as it were. Now, of course, berserkers were a problem as much as they were a use, dependent on the type that they were. And the berserker, the bear warriors, were very uncontrollable. So it made them really great shock troops in battle, but not the kind of person you want around in peacetime. Their unpredictable behavior was known at times to cause them to even kill friends and companions and so on, and they were very difficult to control. So by about 1015, Jarl Eirlekr Hakonarson of Norway outlawed berserkers, and the Icelandic law code, the Gragas, sentenced them to exile. And by and large, organized berserker bands had disappeared by the 12th century. But absolutely, they were not the only kind, because you had, amongst others, not only the berserkers, you also had the Ulfhednar. The Ulfhednar were the wolf warriors. Now, they worked in a team, and they were far more level-headed than the bear warriors. And they were far more terrifying simply because of that. And they were more like sort of hunters and rangers. And to a certain degree, that made them even more frightening. They were a band that might go out and take out entire villages and war bands without leaving any trace. But again, they were not the only ones. You also had the boar warriors, and they were the most stable of the berserkers and were fanatically loyal. And they were usually used as bodyguards to chiefs and kings. And when the bear warriors were exiled or made illegal, and along with them the Ulfhednar, the boar warriors were not, because they were the best bodyguards you could ever have. It was an absolute guarantee that if any kind of assassin or warrior got to the chief or king, you had to know for absolute certain every single one of the bear warriors was no longer breathing. They were that serious about what they did. It made them very, very, very good bodyguards, and therefore highly paid. But of those three, those are the most well known. There was a fourth variety, which may or may not be called the Raven warriors. And these were straight up assassins. And nobody really even knew who they were. Terribly secretive and almost guaranteed to be successful every time. If one did not manage, another would take their place. And they used very dark magics along with their special states that allowed them to assume their animalistic type ways, and therefore they were almost the evil version of berserkers. As much as the others were feared, they were not considered evil, whereas the Raven warriors absolutely were. They were dark. So this too were the kind of warrior magic that happened within the Chthonic realms. So we've got a couple to talk about. Now, we have those that used the Seder, those that used the Galded, those that used the warrior mentalities and magics. And then, of course, along with that, there were runes specific for. So you had the Dramstrafir, which promised dreams of your greatest desire. It was believed to be prophetic, a form of divination. If in your dream you can take control, you can therefore somehow manifest the weird in the waking world, and therefore actually get the dream that you so desired. You had things like the Holstaffer, which was said to open hills. Now, this was probably used for communication with the dead, because the Norse believed the dead lived under the hills, and of course we know that they buried their dead in mounds. The Dragar were found underground, so this would make sense. The Nabrokkerstaffer also was necromantic. It's used to make nabrok, which are pants made from the skin of a deceased man, capable of producing unlimited money. The Lukkerstafir were for luck, and the Otterstafir was to strike fear in the hearts of enemies. So as you can see, there was quite a few different rune staves that were meant to assist in this regard. So what do we see in the Scandinavian realms? Well, again, we have a dual view, which may or may not be of import. Practitioners of magic in Norse mythology were considered witches, but so were the victims of the witch trials in the Scandinavian countries, again during the 17th century. In Viking culture, the term volva describes women who practice seder, a form of magic learnt from the Vanir gods. And while the later historical witch hunts targeted individuals, many of those individuals were, of course, women and were accused of making pacts with the devil, which we saw exactly the same in both England and in Germany. So the theme has gone on. So the Volva or the Voljur practiced cider. Cider was said to come from the Vanir, and among those who were brought into the Aesir pantheon included a number of Vanir gods who were exchanged as hostages after a truce between the god clans. So Freyr, Njord, and Freyr were three such examples. And then, of course, you had the foundling Loki. So absolutely, you had that connection there. Cider was also predominantly a female art, a concept reflected when Loki insulted Odin for his involvement in it, as we see in certain of the old stories. Now, the Vikings, they actually ended before the major witch trials began, but the fear of magic persisted into the modern era, where you got the Nordic witch trials, which took place in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Now, in Norway, especially in the city of Vardø, there were some very, very intense witch trials. Hundreds were executed between the early 17th and late 17th century for sorcery and, typically, for making pacts with the devil. Sweden saw the Great Noise witch trials, which led to the execution of around 300 people. Interestingly, after children falsely accused adults of flying to Mount Blackula, which is quite a frightening thought. But the children turned on their parents like that, but they did. Authorities believed in the possibility of witches working magic, often drawing on demonology and using torture to extract confessions and information about that. They declined by the end of the 17th century due to the improvement of the judicial methods, and the last person sentenced for witchcraft in Norway was in 1715, and the corresponding law under that, which they were sentenced, was actually not abolished until 1842, curiously enough. Nevertheless, we know that while rune magic seems to have been pretty much a male thing, especially the hero rune masters, Seder was definitely a lady's magic. And it was known as a kind of binding magic, because the term Seder comes from the words meaning to bind and the words for rope. Vikings believed that the art of Seder came from the gods. You had two clans of gods, as we mentioned. The first were the Aesir, led by Odin, living in Asgard, who created Midgard and maintained order in the world. Aesir were usually on friendly terms with most of the other gods, including those of the Vanir. But the Vanir were considered to be more chaotic and associated with nature, and they had their own realm known as Vanaheim, which is quite important. At times, the Aesir and the Vanir gods did go to war, and the conflict was eventually resolved with a truce. As part of the truce, hostages were exchanged, and Njord, Freyr, and Freya were sent to live among the Aesir, and they brought the Seder, which was the common magic of the Vanir. Odin, however, was famously covetous of knowledge and very keen to get as much as he could lay his hands on, as we well know. He was willing to be hung upon a tree and nailed to it with a spear for 9 days in order to just get the knowledge of the runes. So when the Vanir arrived, he asked Freyr to teach him the art, and he soon mastered it. And on one occasion, he was ridiculed by Loki for engaging in such a feminine art. But that didn't bother Odin, who was so confident in his knowledge and abilities. Still, the insult reflects that the Vikings saw Seder as female magic. And keeping sort of your place did matter to a certain degree. Now, some say that the wand, which was so distinctive and a tribute to the Volva, was not in fact your Harry Potter style wand at all, but rather a distaff, a longer wand used in the art of spinning, and spinning was considered a female task, so the distaff reiterates the feminine character of Seder. Now, connected, of course, in Nordic mythology and of huge importance were 3 other characters that did spinning. And that, of course, was the Norns, the North Fates that lived at the base of the Yggdrasil world tree, and there they write the destiny of all through spinning the cords of fate. And it is suggested that the use of Seder can pluck upon these cords and thus affect change. Now, most of the skills associated with the Volva was prophecy and such, but also spells. Volva were described as doing things as raising storms, casting love spells, sending nightmares, which could even kill you in your sleep, affecting memory and healing. Um, and much of this was through singing. And another name for what these Volva got up to were Vadloka. And of course, as we know, Vadloka were spirit singers, which is another important aspect to that. So, as you can imagine, quite important. Now, in one of the stories, Thor gets a rock lodged in his skull in a fight with the giant Hrungnir, and he goes to see the Volva Groa to have it removed, and she begins to sing an enchantment which starts to work. This, however, makes Thor excited, and he tries to encourage her, but he makes the mistake of talking about her husband, who she thought was dead but is only lost. She becomes so emotionally overwhelmed she forgets the spell, and as a result, Thor lives out the rest of his life with the stone lodged in his skull. Hey, Theophily. Now, one of the things that seems to be a fact is that those who had this power, the Volva, lived outside normal society, and they wandered from town to town and farm to farm, where they were welcomed in exchange for delivering prophecies and performing magic. They were treated with a huge amount of respect. They could speak with anyone they wanted, regardless of social rank. But they were considered to be other. Now, in the saga of Eric the Red, who, in case you are wondering, was a very real person and a very real Viking, there is part of it that tells of a woman named Thorbjörg who traveled around Greenland, and when she arrives at Eric's hall, her clothing is described in detail. She wore a floor-length blue or black cloak, trimmed with precious stones sewn into the hem. She carried a jewel-encrusted wand and wore a crystal necklace, which may have been in the imitation of the famed Brisingamen, which was, of course, set with the weird stones. The necklace worn by Freya herself. She had a pouch at her waist in which she concealed varying magical tools. She wore a hood made of black lambskin, trimmed with ermine fur, calfskin slippers, and wildcat skin gloves lined with ermine fur. Cats, of course, were associated with Freya. So this might be another reference to the goddess. Her clothes were very rich, suggesting wealth and status, but her shoes, gloves, and hood suggest that she had a wandering existence. Upon arrival, she is treated with great respect. She is served a special dinner of goat's milk and an assortment of animal hearts. She is escorted to the high seat from which to conduct her art and made comfortable with goose down pillows. To complete her work, she needs a chorus of women to function as backup singers, and they will sing the galder that allows her to reach the state of ecstasy between life and death, or between the mortal and the divine. And when she is at this boundary, she works her magic. In the story, there are no women in the area that know the chants except for a young woman called Gudrid, who learnt them from her mother, but she is a Christian, so she does not want to participate. But in the end, she agrees and is praised for her contribution. So we have quite a few stories around these things that tell us quite a lot of very interesting bits. Now, the Vardø witch trials, which happened between 1662 and 1663, show the other side. They were held in Vardø in Finnmark in northern Norway in the winter of that year, and were one of the biggest in all of Scandinavia. 30 women were put on trial, accused of sorcery and making pacts with the devil. One was sentenced to a workhouse, 2 tortured to death, and 18 were burnt at the stake. And it was the third of the big 3 mass trials in northern Norway, preceded by the Vardø witch trials in 1621 and the Vardø witch trials of 1651 and 1653, and one of the biggest witch trials in Norway. It was the peak of the witch hunt that intensified in northern Norway since the first mass trial in 21. And Vardø was in fact the center of the Norwegian Nordkalotten. So we see in the trials traditional witches, which initially were considered as an important and honored part of society, now were demonized and hated. We know that, for example, in 1662 September, Dorse Lauritzdotter was brought for questioning at the Vardøhus fortress. She had been accused once before and acquitted, but Lauritz Braas said that 2 of his servants who had recently died claimed to be bewitched by her. 4 witches, led by Dorse, in the shape of a dove, an eagle, a crow, and a swan, opened their wind knots over the sea to make a boat sink. But the plot failed because the crew had prayed to God. Dorse was burnt at the stake for this with 2 other women, and soon followed by another 2. In Christmas of 1662, children were accused when sisters Ingeborg Ivarsdatter and Karen Ivarsdatter, who were only 8, children of one of the newly executed women, were brought in for questioning along with Maren Olsdatter, the niece of one of the executed women. The children told many stories, and the priest had a hard time making them say the catechism when they were in the witch's hole prison in the fortress, the Trollgvinnetingun Silhulit. Say that 5 times fast. Which was where the witches were kept while awaiting a verdict. Ingeborg Ivarsdatter confessed that she and Solveig Nilsdatter had celebrated Christmas in Kiberg with Maren Olsdatter and Sigrid Klokare while incarcerated. She and Solveig transformed themselves into cats and crawled under the gate, met with Maren and Sigrid, who came flying over the sea from Vardangefjorden in Kiberg. They had broken into a basement and helped themselves to wine until they all became drunk, while Satan held the candle for them. The 2 adults had argued, and Solveig had become so drunk that Satan had a hard time getting her on her feet and back into jail later that night. The priest in the fortress pointed out this must have been the reason why alcohol had disappeared from the basement. You can kind of see where this is going, I'm sure. And thank you for the likes there, Gendre. That is very, very kind of you. We love lots of likes. But please, guys, do throw up comments and questions and more. Now, the problem here is you have quite a few children being used to extract evidence. And of course, as you can imagine, they were not that hard to convince. So, yeah, things sort of went south because of this. And as a result, they cooked up plenty witches. And this, of course, led to a lot of problems and more. Simply because they didn't want people worshipping other things. That was the bottom line there, which was kind of sad, and shows, of course, the danger. Now, another thing that shows exactly that happened, of course, in Norway, where they did exactly the same basic thing. And they say that among the Nordic countries, here the trials were among the most intense. So between 277 to 350 executions occurred through the period, and Norway was in union with Denmark during this period. So the trials were generally conducted by instructions from Copenhagen. The authorities and the clergy conducted the trials using handbooks of demonology and interrogation techniques that included torture. And of course, after a guilty verdict, the condemned was forced to expose as many other people as could be got out of them, under threat of even more torture. So things didn't go well. A Norwegian law from 1687 maintained the death penalty for witchcraft for a long time, though, and the last person to be found guilty of witchcraft in Norway was Birgitte Halderstatter in 1715, which shows that they didn't change very much, and it was rather sad. Norwegian law caused a great deal of death, and it sort of showed how politics and religion, by and large, do not go well together at all. So that was Norway. Now we know as well that there was a lot to be said, but reports back, and this is the important part, you need to look at who did the reporting on it. Satan's fury was unleashed in Sweden in the year of our Lord 1668. That tells you straight off who wrote it and what their viewpoint was. The king sent out witchcraft commission with the power to impose the death penalty, and next thing you know, verdicts are flying, and this goes all over Sweden, and it became known as the Great Noise, as huge furor came up and a lot of fear, and the great witch hunts and trials began. And before it fell silent, the axe and the flames claimed the lives of many. So right away you can see that there were reasons behind, and much of it was not really about religion at all. It was politics and money. So there are still books that have stayed around. 400-year-old Icelandic books of magic are still in certain museums around and about. We know that evidence remains of what was done, but the trouble is, again, that it's all about who does the reporting. So we know that famous witches include Marit Jonsdotter, Malin Matsdotter in Sweden. They were victims of the 17th century witch hunts. Anne Pedersdotter and Elizabeth Nyapan from Norway, also from those trials. Others include Anne Koldings and Geide Spandenmager from Denmark, also victims of the trial. Marit Jonsdotter was allegedly a Swedish witch, prominent victim of the Great Noise, and one of the first, which then led to even more people being accused. Malin Matsdotter, known as Rumper Malin, one of the few people in Sweden confirmed to have been burned at the stake for witchcraft, and the only one executed by burning during the Great Noise. Lassis Birgitta, the first woman in Sweden confirmed to have been executed for witchcraft, specifically in 1550. So there were some famous ones there. In Norway, you had Anne Persdotter, you had Lisbeth Nyapan, who with Anne Pedersdotter was executed, and then you had Finn Kirsten Eifarsdotter, a Norwegian woman accused of witchcraft who confessed under torture to having associated with the devil, which changed her case from a minor offense to a full-blown witch trial and got her cooked. In Denmark, Anna Koldings, considered to be very, very dangerous, known for confessing to priests and visitors that she and other women had sent devils to bewitch the royal fleet. One of the first women to be executed for sorcery in Denmark and Scandinavia was Geide Spandenmager. And of course, she went the way of the flames as well. So it shows that at one time to be a witch was a very, very wonderful, important thing, and at other times suddenly was not. But witches did not work alone, as we know. We have seen that the spirits of the dead, what we in South Africa would refer to as the ancestors, played a strong part. But they were not the only spirits. You also had the gods themselves that were connected to it. But by and large, your Scandinavian witches were animistic and shamanic in a great many of their methods and arts, which is quite important because it shows that they also dealt with a lot of other spirits. And that includes the Huldra, a very important and beautiful forest spirit that could only be told wasn't human by noting that they had a cow's tail. The Trollkirjering, a very ugly hag associated with trolls and their magic. And we know that there was even a set of rune types that were known as troll runes, a sort of anti-rune, if you will. So the trolls had their own version. The Sami, of course, had a mastery of magic, and especially the use of the rune drums, a belief in witches that carried on right through now, the Huldra, a seductive nature spirit that we will have to speak on. And then, of course, a very interesting and slightly weird thing, which was the kitchen witch. Now, in modern Wicca, we talk of kitchen witches as being witches with specific arts to be found within the kitchen, as you would imagine. However, the kitchen witch can also refer to something quite different, and we will touch on that. We also know that the Sami were supposed to be very powerful witches, and they need mentions too. And of course, as we know that just as in Greek witchcraft, the witch goddess is Hecate, among the Nordic people, Freya was the witch goddess and associated with cats, which is why black cats are considered witch cats. So we've got a number of different things to consider here. So what were the Huldra? The Huldra were in folklore nature spirits that looked like very beautiful human women and could sometimes lure young men into the forest. And if he follows, she will attempt to seduce him. If she is refused, however, she may become malevolent and either curse the man with ill fortune, or in extreme cases, the man simply disappears. The Huldra can be distinguished from actual women because they have a tail like that of a cow. They would attempt to hide the tail under their dress, but in most stories, young men are given an opportunity to react to it. And it is said that if a man offers to marry a Huldra and the marriage takes place in a church, she will become fully human and the tail will disappear. So there is that. And of course, there are all kinds of interesting depictions of these pretty beings and how they might be important to you. Now, trolls, as we well know, are very important in the Nordic mythology. They may or may not be part of the alpha of one variety. Thank you so much to Endless Thoughts for that heart. That is truly wondrous. And I do hope all of you other people will give some likes along as well. Now, we know, amongst other things, that in the forest you have varying forms of trolls. And of course, nature is beautiful in Norway. However, along with your beautiful Huldra maids, you also have the trolls and water sprites and more. So we've spoken of the Huldra, which are very pretty, but you get lots of different types of trolls, and they are really helpful to human beings. Some are ugly and slow-witted, while others look and behave just like human beings. But they all have been known to gobble you up. One thing's for sure, that the troll does not like sunlight, and if they get the smallest glimpse of it, they will turn to stone. There are many famous landmarks in Norway that are in fact said to actually be trolls who have fallen prey to this particular thing. Now, along with your trolls and more, you also have other spirits worth mentioning, such as the Njok, which is a beautiful water spirit that plays the violin, luring women and children to the water. His songs are so sweet that people will walk out into the water and then get drowned, unable to resist the enchanting melodies. Sometimes the Njok takes the shape of majestic white horses, and if anybody climbs on the back, they are unable to get off and will drown when he jumps in the river. So there are all kinds. Now, there are naturally not only good witches, There are also bad ones, but among the bad ones, you have the troll hags, the mothers and wives of the trolls, and the trollkering have magical powers that will allow her to shift into other shapes to play tricks on people. Some have been known to lead a band of black cats with them, or even fly on a broomstick, and occasionally steal milk from farms. And the way to deal with them, of course, is to have a kitchen witch, which we will get to shortly. Now, you also have the Nissa, and the Nissa is basically like a gnome, a little man with a long white beard and a bright red hat shaped like a cone. He likes to live in a barn or in one of the outbuildings, and if treated well, he will look after the farm. But they have bad tempers, and if treated badly, they might play some naughty tricks on you. So you have to treat them well. So those are some of the spirits dealt with in the magical north. Now, why the kitchen witch? Well, the kitchen witch is a little witch doll which is hung up in the kitchen. And their powers refer to those that help breads and cakes to rise, that toast does not burn, pots don't boil dry or boil over, and there'll never be too much salt when baking, boiling, or stewing. The spices you mix will be good, and the tea and coffee will be wonderful. They are good luck to have, but they also are there to drive off bad witches, the troll witches, which is another power. And it is a tradition, even up till today, that a great many people in the Scandinavian lands will have a kitchen witch. And it's considered very good luck to give a kitchen witch to a friend or family member. And they will give good luck to them and good luck to you. So who knows? Perhaps it's something worth doing. Now, the people not often spoken of were the Sami. And the Sami were infamous for being great witch masters. They could summon the spirits of their ancestors and the gods of nature with their magic drums, the witch drums, the rune drums, and this enabled them to see the future, divine news from distant places, and use their drumming music to influence fortunes in life and business and find things all over. Historical sources tell us that the Norwegian farmers would pay the Sami for such magical services, but that one should be very wary of their company. If one incurred the wrath of the Sami, the Norwegians believed the Sami could release a gand, an evil spirit, and even a physical object which had the power to strike a man dead and even split mountains. So the Sami were absolutely something people were terrified of. Now, I don't know how you feel about all of that. What do you think? The old ways have not been forgotten. We know that beyond that, there have been changes too. And my eyes are going a little dry. I do apologize. We see absolutely that there are changing views in the modern world as to what is important, into what is real, and into what matters. Thank you so much for the roses there. That is massively kind of you, my dear. Have you got no comments as yet, though? You always have so many comments for me. So in the modern age, Um, given the, excuse me, given the fact that the truth of what the witches were and did in the old ways was to do with um, the old religions, there has been something of a turning back to these things, and individuals from diverse professions and backgrounds have started practicing their craft again within witch circles and integrating elements of Nordic traditions and even planetary magic into their personal preferences. Um, you also have the Easter witches, where children go door to door, much like in the American Halloween. Um, and there's a lot of different views on how all of this fits together with the historical heathenry, as they like to call it now. Uh, many modern witches prefer to keep their craft very private, incorporating it into their daily lives, but not openly displaying it. Modern witchcraft also comes for all kinds of different viewpoints and things, and it can be argued, on the one hand, that there is a evolution within the faith, and that is a good thing. Or you might say that people are making it up as they go along, and it's got nothing to do with the original. I suppose that's a matter of personal belief and preference. Um, we know that the modern witch is very much not the one from the trials where there was accusations of devil worship and more. Though I dare say it's quite possibly uh, arguable that there are such people these days. People will do anything to be very, very true about that. So what do the modern types get up to? Well, we do know that there is a strong return to the old Seder and Galder, which is very often considered quite important. I know for a fact that there is a particular family out of Norway that still practice the old family traditions of stav, which includes a whole selection of things, including magic and witchcraft, herbs and herb lore, crafting methods and techniques based on runic teachings, and of course a full set of martial arts, armed and unarmed, designed around the runes. And of course, we know that at a point after the witch trials, the runes were reintegrated, changing from the original Germanic style, the Elder Futhark, and becoming what is known as the Nordic Futhark, which has only 16 runes, as opposed to the 25 of the original Chthonic runes. So, absolutely, there's quite a lot of tradition that has carried on, but there is also a lot of new stuff. So people will mix in planetary magic and more, um, all kinds of additional sort of stuff, the use of crystals and such, and animal bones and things which probably are not traditional at all, but you might say is an evolution. Uh, there are certain herbs that are used that are quite important. And we know from the Anglo Saxon that there was the poems of the 9 herbs, and there are also the poems of the trees in the old Eddas as well. And the different trees were very important. So there are modern interpretations of old things. There are traditions still kept up today, though from what I understand, the family in question, only the one sister is has any interesting in follow on the old magical practices. The others are boys, and their interest is in the martial arts side of things. So, as you can imagine, certain things do get kept, and certain things do get lost. Um, in that regard, we know that the runes are still hugely popular, both bind runes and casting runes and more, and different forms and spreads become a big thing, and whether or not they are important, I suppose. It's about culture and understanding and knowing where you come from and finding your place in the world to a great degree. And I remember seeing a video um, not terribly long ago where they were talking to a rather gormless American student who was saying the problem with being white is we don't have a culture. And I thought, you haven't even been in a library in your life, you silly tit. Because we have tons and tons of culture of all kinds, and much of it is astounding with all kinds of folklore and history and music and dancing and a great legacy that is practically impossible to ignore or avoid, which goes to show that the biggest problem with the modern age, by and large, is bloody laziness, coupled with gormless arrogance, something which I do not approve of at all. And I think that most of you who are part of this channel would probably agree that if you're interested, finding out is so easy these days. The biggest problem is knowing which is the bits to look at and which are true, and which bits to even bother to look at because there's just so much. And it's a very worthwhile thing, which is precisely the point of this channel. Yes, we cover the weird and the paranormal and the supernatural, but even that is part of amazing culture, the great stories and fascinating concepts and understanding that really and truly do matter. So we have seen how the influence of politics and the influence of movements of people brought all kinds of views of magic across the world. And we know as well that with a question brought up, I think it was you, Endless Thoughts, that brought it up, asking, well, before the Anglo-Saxons, what was the magic of England then? And the answer to that is very, very difficult to establish. Um, you're going back to pre-writing times, and there's not a lot known. We see echoes of it among the Welsh magic and the Irish magic, of course, and of that we will talk in future because it speaks of the fairy and of the worlds beyond, the lands of the Tuatha De Danann and of the lands of Anun and more, and the dark elves and the light elves, which of course we see echoes of among the Scandinavians with their Ljosalfar and Svartalfar, which maybe have connections to the old stories of the Furbolgs and what they did as well, which also matters. So there's a whole collection of things that get exposed when you look into all of this, and which I think is absolutely wonderful. And so we shall go further and in different places, but Um, do you have any particular questions or anything like that that you would like to know more of? Ask me now, please do. I would love to hear from you to know what you consider this to be. I would be most interested in hearing your questions or comments. So do ask. But that said, alongside it, also, where else shall we go next? There are so many places and so many interesting pre-existing stories and witchcrafts that are quite terrifying in a great many ways, um, and of course tie into other such stories as well. I mean, we haven't even spoken of the witches of Romania, which were apparently quite terrifying and are said to be able to curse so strongly that the dead rise. Um, we know, of course, in places like Haiti, you have sorcerers with the power to bring zombies to life. And the amazing stories of the serpent and the rainbow, which, by the way, if you ever want to see a historically accurate movie about the whole zombie thing in Haiti, the movie is actually called The Serpent and the Rainbow. It is very old. Whether or not you'll be able to find it, I don't know. But if you can, let me tell you, that is hands down the best one ever. A brilliant, brilliant, and utterly fascinating zombie movie based on real life and real events, which is even creepier. Um, and yes, the events depicted in the movie, though they movie-sized it, as you were, uh, it originally did happen. It was a genuine story based on true events, which was even makes it even more interesting. We also have places where the so-called witches are quite different. We haven't spoken of the witches of China or of India and more. And we have several African countries to go and look at as well that we haven't even touched on. So I would like to know what you think in that regard. What places you would enjoy going to. And let's get a bit of dialogue going because I would like to know more. But yes, it seems that people are very quiet tonight. Give comments whether you like it, you hate it, you want to know more, you want to know less. Uh, what can you say? Where would you go with this? Um, Beanie, do you have any comments? No? There's a lot that can be said. Let's say that. Um, I think it would be a wonderful thing to hear your opinions on all of these particular ideas. Do let me know in that regard. In that regard, I want to hear from you so that we can tell how it might or might not affect us. I know that not everybody does believe in magic. I think that what we call magic is arguable. And if we go with the famous description of Gerald Gardner, we find that a lot of things can be referred to as magic, whether or not you realize it. So I don't know. But with that, we have actually come rather quickly to the end of Scandinavian, Anglo-Saxon, Germanic type witches. And there is much more in other countries, and in the next, we shall go there. And I think, to be honest with you, I am going to take the request of Endless Thoughts and have a look at the Chinese witches, which may or may not give us a completely different view as to what makes magic magic. Or then again, maybe it won't. Do let me know. Tell me what you think, and thank you so much for those likes. Do tell me where you feel would be the best place to go. Give comments, as it were, on what you think so far and whether or not you think any of this is important or interesting. I always want to know more. Are you having a hard evening, my dear? You seem very down. Are things not going well? Well, there are those who would argue that all of life is. That is true. Um, I personally do think there is magic. I do think it exists. Whether or not it works the way people think it does is another question. Um, but there are certainly amazing things, and people give it different names. Some call it miracles, some call it magic. I think ultimately there's a great deal we don't understand. And to be honest, even some of the things we do that we foolishly call science is nevertheless, in and of itself, pretty magical. Um, it is a fascinating topic. Um, I am a great believer in the philosophical viewpoint of the old Anglo-Saxons. And if you ever read the book The Way of Weird by Brian Bates, you will have a chance to understand that specific viewpoint. It's a little bit difficult to get, but once you do, it's a pretty cool story. Yes, that would do it. That would absolutely do it. I think that by and large, it is true to say that people become very, very attached to their faith. Um, well, I sometimes wonder. I think that in some regards, you should hold your beliefs and stick to it. But yes, I think it is fair to say that there are times where it will make more trouble, if you will, than you are likely to get success out of. Welcome to Karina. Hey there. And thank you for a donut. You are very, very late joining. Have you just got home? But yes, endless thoughts. I think that it is true to say that this is why these topics are difficult, and while they are so touchy with people. Uh, I see Karina is still at work. They are on such a different timeline. It's very hard for her to even join in at all. And I do believe, Karina, you are suffering under the impact of all of your forest fires and now tornadoes as well. What the heck? We've been discussing a number of forms of magic, and one of the most important ones, which is part of Seder, are creating bind runes that will keep you safe from bad weather. Perhaps we need that going. Perhaps we need a bind rune for you too, Endless Thoughts, to keep the family from getting too upset with you. We will have to work out what bind runes will be most appropriate for whichever appropriate thing. They say that in the Icelandic Galderbrook, there are ones for all. So certainly wants to defend against weather. I don't know if you can defend against parental upset. That's a hard one. Yeah, they say that if you want a good relationship with somebody, you never discuss politics, religion, or sex. Because guaranteed, those are the three things that will cause upsets of a huge amount. Thank you for the likes. You are a darling as always, Karina. So, yes, there's a definite sense that there's magic for everything, but very often not for human relations. That's a difficult one, and if I ever discover the magic of mastering that, I'll let you guys know. But to date, that is the one thing I have never figured out. People seem to be more complicated than anything at all. So maybe that's a thing, and maybe it isn't. I don't know. I I can't give good advice in that regard. Um, so huge thanks, of course, to um, all of you wonderful peoples that are showing an interest in this. But yes, Galda and Seder are where European English and Germanic magic comes from. But this isn't the same all over the world. There are many forms of animistic and similar type magics of varying varieties, and some involve the gods and some do not. So perhaps we need to understand that the viewpoints will change. We do, however, need to keep in mind, as we always have, that while those within the art might consider themselves to be perfectly good and to be doing good things, that is not necessarily the case in the rest of society. And that can cause a huge amount of clash whenever you find a difference with religion, because people become very, very firm on their religion and they think they are right and will not be swayed. And we are seeing it, of course, right now around the world in several countries where there are religious based clashes that have become very political. So perhaps this is very, very important and needs to be considered in that regard. And one of the most worrying parts of it is I see that a group that pretty much around the world is known for never getting involved in religious conflict, that are the most live and let live group of all, which are the Hindus. By and large, they don't care if you want to be a different religion, they will sit alongside you quite happily. Even they're getting involved. And that worries me, because if you can get a pacifist involved in a fight, then, my God, you're in trouble. So maybe we need to worry. Maybe we need a bit more magic. I don't know. But it seems that what was once is coming back. We find that the old English forms are popping back up in England. There are a great many more people wearing the pentacle. We find the old Nordic and Scandinavian things are popping up in Norway and Scandinavia, and you are seeing people wearing the hammer of Thor and more, and looking into, at least I believe, um, again, regaining the abilities of the Bearsak, the Ulfhedna, and I can't remember the old Scandinavian terms, but the boar warriors and the raven warriors. So maybe it's a thing. We know, of course, that that's not something that's even a topic in South Africa, because our magicians and witches never went away at all. They are still around to this day and are very active indeed. So we don't need to wonder if things are coming back, they're here. And perhaps this is a good thing, because while we might not always believe or agree with it, we are used at least to having people of different viewpoints around us. And I think actually that makes us a lot better off than a great many cultures that have become incredibly single in their viewpoints, with even violent denial of outside viewpoints. They are having a serious time of it, and don't handle well. And I find that by and large, things always seem to turn back, as they say, to uh, politics, money, and religion. And it's an interesting sort of viewpoint, that in the old ways you had a very different view as to what mattered. And if you upset the balance, even if you were quite powerful, if you broke against the way of the weird, it would cause you a huge amount of trouble that would upset even the gods. Uh, so it sort of kept people in their lane to a certain degree, which by and large shows the importance of the culture. We know then that we have got our understandings, our beliefs, our words in modern English from a great deal of the old practices and old ways. And for those who don't believe so, we start with Monday, the day of the moon; Tuesday, the day of Tyr, who is the Scandinavian god of justice; Woden, the Anglo-Saxon chief god for Wednesday; Thor, both Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian, for Thursday; Freya, again Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian, for Friday. And it is only with the day of Saturn that you get a Roman god. And then, of course, we end on the day of the sun. So if you think that we don't have influence, think again. We celebrate Eostre at Easter. We celebrate Christmas at Beltane. Why those dates? Because those are the dates of the original feasts. Early Christians never celebrated Christmas or Easter. That came afterwards with the formalization of religion. When it actually happened is another question. And I'm not saying that there are bad things to celebrate in any religion. I'm just saying that the influences of the old ways are among us. Our use of poetry and of choral singing, even in church, comes from the old Galdra. So we have that going for us. The idea of standing on a specific platform as a leader comes from Seder magic. So right there, we see that influence as well. The idea that a wand or rod is a symbol of office used by kings, used by popes, used by many all over the world is similar to the way the Volva were staff bearers. It shows authority. So, for those who say, why were we not taught magic? Why were they not part of our education? The answer is that it was, and you just didn't know it. So, perhaps it's something that we need to consider. We absolutely do need to think further in where magic, ritual, and the old ways have influenced society. We see that our words, though debated, come from the old ways. The idea of a warlock, the Wiccans say it comes from Werloga or Oathbreaker, whereas I say not at all, not at all. There's enough evidence in history to prove that it comes from Vadlokka, which means a spirit singer. That a warlock is a master of the spirits. So we have modern ways. We see that the idea of enchantment comes from the sung spells, encantare, canta, to chant. So it is through song that you are enchanted, through the sung spells, both from Galder and Sether. So we absolutely have that going for us in our language and in our churches, which to me shows that some things never change. Humans are humans, and much of what is out there matters, and it has always mattered, and it will continue mattering for a very, very long time. But with that said, we have finished with the Vikings, and we will be going on, I think, to China. And we will see what witches might be in China, and if we can come to understand anything more. We get good ones, we get bad ones. We get ones which are good but are accused of being bad. And who knows, perhaps we get ones that are bad that are said to be good. And we've seen that with several religious scandals in different religions around the world. So let's say that people are people. And maybe we shall just keep trying to support each other as much as possible and remain human. So, yes, we shall definitely keep in touch. We will meet again tomorrow night and therein discuss more. But until then, my friends, I shall bid you all a very much good night, for our topic is over. And I shall say to you, sleep deep and sleep sweet. But remember, most importantly, sleep with one eye open. Keep the holy symbol near at hand, because those things that go bump in the night might very well go bump for you.